Coming up on this episode of the Delta Huddle Podcast.
There's a lot of times that are the best time. Like any time can be a great time. And I know I'm involved in the mentoring program at Appian, and that's something we say. It's not just mentors with their proteges. It's the proteges can teach a lot to the mentors as well. No matter what level you're at, there's something you can teach someone else or help them with. And maybe there's other people out there who are in product management looking to make the jump, or at least curious about it, or they're new to beta testing. So yeah, I was like, no, I can do this. I have a unique perspective, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Hello, I'm Stefan Stenrus, and this is the Delta Huddle Podcast by Centercode. Now, oftentimes on the show, we feature guests who have spent 5, 10, sometimes even 30 years in the world of beta testing. But today's episode is a refreshing new perspective, that of a brand new beta manager leading a program forward. Elizabeth Hall is Senior Beta Program Manager at Appian, a low-code B2B platform for automating business processes. Now, coming from the world of product management and user research, Elizabeth is newer in her role compared to some of our other guests, but she's already spearheading an incredible transformation of Appian's beta program. In this episode, we explored why it's important to set the tone of your beta program early, the differences between qualitative and quantitative data, and why mentorship was key for Elizabeth's start in beta testing. We can't wait to see what she does with the beta program at Appian, and I hope you enjoy our conversation.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. It's great to hear the journey of a fellow beta program manager. So I'd love to hear just how you got started into beta or into your career.
Yeah, so I think it makes sense to probably go all the way back to the beginning. So for those of you who are watching this on video, you may see a William and Mary flag behind me. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and went to William and Mary and studied psychology, and then went to George Mason University and studied educational psychology. So you might be thinking, how did you go from educational psychology to beta testing for a B2B software platform? And it's one of those things where every move in my career has made sense based on where I was immediately prior. But if you look from like point A to point E, it doesn't immediately make sense. So right after grad school, I went to a company that did educational research, and we also had our own proprietary survey platform. So we did surveys for public school districts around the country. And then after a few years of that, I realized that was a little bit niche and I wanted to expand into the tech space in general. So I went to a company that did tech research. So I started there as a research analyst. And then after I had been there for about 9 months, they were trying to launch their own survey platform. And I thought, I know a thing or two about survey platforms, not in this context, but it's still a B2B survey platform. So that's how I got into product management. And I felt like everything clicked for me in that moment. I had the aspects of research that I loved, but it was customer facing, and I was getting deeper into the technology. And I was an associate product manager for a year there, which was basically like product management 101. And I loved that. And I did that for 6 more years before I got into beta testing. So I went to another company after that where I was doing product management for a sales training company. So not education in the traditional K through 12 or higher education sense, but corporate education and professional development. And I was still working with instructional designers because we were trying to bring our intellectual property into a Salesforce integrated platform. And then I went to Appian 3 years ago, which is where I currently work as a beta program manager, but I was a senior product manager there for a number of years. So Appian is a B2B low-code business automation platform is probably the best way to describe that. I know that sounds a little jargony, but what that means is people like me who have no background whatsoever in computer science can actually learn how to build a business process app so that big businesses can automate their entire business. So I've been there since June 2020, and just this past April, I transitioned into managing all of our beta programs. And I made that jump because I missed the customer-facing aspects of my role. I was doing some customer-facing work, but it was a bit more focused on actually designing and developing the software, which was an exciting experience, and I learned a ton, but I wanted to get a little bit closer to the go-to-market activities and the customer-facing stuff that we do at Appian. So a new opportunity to lead the beta programs came up. And I thought, on top of doing more customer-facing work, I actually had the ability to build a beta program for the ground up, or from the ground up, which sounded like a super cool opportunity and something I had never done before. So luckily, our VP of product launch took me on, and I've been doing that for about 5 months now.
That's great. I love the story. I have a similar research background, and I had that same kind of transition from research into product management. And what's cool, I'll point this out because I feel like it's now kind of a little more innate in you, is that curiosity. Research, you're doing it to like get answers, like see what's going on. You have like hypothesis, you want to go test it out. You have questions you need to get answered. And product management's like so much in that same vein, right? Like I'm trying to build a solution to someone's problems, so I need to understand what those solutions are. So that's really cool hearing just that like little bit of a background on you, and then jumping from product management into beta to kind of stand up your program. Again, naturally curious, poking around, like how am I going to get started in this? How am I going to build this program? Before you stepped in, how was beta being run by, like you were a product manager, how was beta being run without that centralized resource?
Yeah, so actually as a product manager, I had never done a beta program at Appian, but our company had done a few beta programs over the last several years, and it was a bit more ad hoc. It was product managers kind of doing it on the side, which, as you know, for product management and beta management, it's a full-time job in and of itself. It's hard to do kind of on the side. So yeah, we had product managers and our consultants who actually do implementations of Appian apps for customers. They were helping as well. So it was sort of an all hands on deck, but there was no centralized function that was project managing and program managing the initiatives and deciding what we want to do beta programs on and who's going to run what. And I think because of that, we still had successful beta programs where we got the information we needed prior to launching new products. But it was clear after doing that for a few rounds that we needed to centralize the function and have somebody really owning it. So it's not one more thing that product managers have to do in addition to their jobs that are probably already taking over 40 hours a week. So
definitely. Yeah. If you got a 40-hour plus product manager having to pick up the jobs of a beta program manager, it's like just part of their job. So it doesn't seem like a very helpful to their anxiety problems of trying to get good products out the door. And so,
and the product managers are still super involved, don't get me wrong, especially because it is just me, and at the end of the day they're the subject matter experts on what they're building. They're designing the product alongside their user experience designers, and they're working with their software engineers every day to implement things. So it's not like I can just go off and run a beta program. They're very much involved every step of the way, but I can take a lot of that overhead and operational stuff off of their plate so they can focus on building the product, and then someone else is focusing on keeping the beta program moving without them having to follow up with 20 customers or, you know, chase things down from legal or whatever it might be operational wise.
And you could pick up so many more specific best practices and skills, and you get to develop those skills rather than I just have to do a little bit of beta, so I don't need to put a lot of effort into it. So by giving that domain knowledge to a specific resource rather than like spreading it thin, I think it allows for far more efficiency and effectiveness for your programs. So
yeah,
product managers get to make the decisions on the product and they get to read that data or review that data from you, who's got it in the best way, who's got the best information, because you get to spend the time and devote the energy to getting the right information.
Right, exactly.
Love it. All right, so you're just getting started into your program. So you made that jump from product management into beta management. So you're starting up a program. What's your first steps? What are you doing? You're in the lay of the land. What did you do quickly?
Yeah, so when I joined, we were already months into a beta program, so I had to ramp up pretty quickly on something the team had already started. I joined the team a couple months before Appian had its big annual conference. And at that conference, we were announcing a current beta program that we're working on. So of course, there was an influx of customers and partners that were interested in participating. So a lot of it was learning as I was doing, because I think the first couple months, something I was wrestling with was, okay, I need to execute on this program that's very much in flight that I feel several months behind on because I just joined this team. And when I was a product manager, I was not working on this part of the product at all. So that's one advantage I've had is I was a product manager at this company for years prior to this role. So in other areas, I am familiar with what's going on, but this was a brand new area to me. So I had to ramp up on all of that. But then in parallel, I felt like I had to build a playbook and a plan to make sure that what we're doing here gets documented and what's working and what's not, where we can repeat these steps for future programs or do something differently, or something didn't go smoothly, so we should add this, or we had this step listed, but we actually didn't really need it, or whatever it might be. So it was a mix of learning as we were going and then just trying to understand what was working well and what wasn't, so I can apply that to other future beta programs, which I've already started working on a couple other ones since this one kicked off in the spring.
Good point. It's interesting. Like, I always think of the first couple of weeks of a beta test as like the most crucial, not just for data collection and, making sure we get quick changes in, but making sure the tone is set right for testers, right? So that we can kind of we can piggyback off their enthusiasm and motivation to get started testing this new thing, because it tends to wean off over time, right? That energy that they have, they get a little more fatigued, or they've been putting a lot of time into it. So you can imagine stepping into a program that's already going. You're having to combat a lot of this tester fatigue that's going on. You've already collected some data that's going on. How do you decipher all that stuff that's already happened while still collecting new stuff? So that seems very rough. So how did that experience compare to the next beta that you ran? Were you felt better about it, or?
It can be challenging because beta programs, or at least the ones we do here, go over the course of several months. So as you can imagine, at our conference in the spring back in May, we had dozens, close to 100. Actually, maybe that's a bit of a stretch. It was like 60 or 70 customers that were very interested and were like, this is great. We just need a few key references to really advocate for this feature next year at this conference. And when we go to market, we're going to have so many. This is great. And then it's like, okay, 60 of those people there were 60 people who initially responded, and then a chunk of them don't follow up with us. And then another chunk are like, oh, this actually isn't going to be a good fit. And then another chunk's like, we don't have the capacity to do this. And then the chunk's getting smaller and smaller. And then, oh, there's legal concerns. We can't move forward. So whatever it might be, it starts as a huge pool. And you think, oh my gosh, naively, we're going to have all these customers. And it ends up being a lot smaller than that. But I think it's important to have quality over quantity. I'd rather have a handful, half a dozen, a dozen, somewhere in between there, that are really engaged and wanting to use our software and are meeting with us regularly. And I think that's something we've had to do because, as you can imagine, the availability of the customers to test what we've built waxes and wanes over the course of several months. Like, we're coming off of summer here, so there's a lot of absences, and then suddenly it's been almost a month and we haven't met with them. So just making sure that you're meeting regularly as much as possible to keep them on track. And if they don't have time to work independently to test the beta software, use that time with them to test it with them and to be there as a subject matter expert when they have questions. Almost use it as a usability test in a way. So it's different with every customer. Some are very engaged, some it's harder to move them along. And I don't think it's ever for a lack of interest in the software. It just seems to be more of executive priorities changing, or they get pulled in other directions, or whatever it might be. So just really trying to keep them on track and engaged and excited about new things we're rolling out throughout that beta test period.
Yeah, definitely. There's all kinds of testers out there, just like there's all kinds of different stakeholders that you deal with, all have different preferences and all that fun stuff. So one thing that
Right.
kind of caught my attention is talking about those evangelist advocates, right? So like getting those few customers that are hot on this new feature and hot on this new update that's coming out to be able to advocate and push that. So that's a tactic that you use for those events to get people that are excited about it and be able to use them as like user generated content, those testimonials, so they can kind of help spread the word, do a little bit of the marketing work for us.
Yeah, exactly. Like we want to put them up on the stage at our event and talk about how awesome their experience was using this as a beta feature and what they plan on doing it once it's generally available to everyone. So we definitely want to capitalize on customers that have a positive experience in the program. Of course, we want to hear from those who didn't as well. Maybe we don't put them on the main stage to talk about why it wasn't so great, but it's good information for us to help make the product better so that when it comes time for the conference and just going to market in general, we have a really good story to tell and we've really refined the product to address some of those concerns.
Definitely, yeah. I've heard a couple of people using conferences as a not necessarily launch for they do launch features, they explain that, but then they tend to go into that like second phase of beta where they like do the more public like, hey everybody, you can join the beta. Right. So I know that I've seen Tableau do that at their conference. They'd have their big conference and they'd say like, oh yeah, we have a beta section where they'd bring in like, hey, you can come join our beta program here. And they'd like help onboard people straight into their beta program with like QR codes into their program and all that fun stuff.
Yep. Yeah, that's what we did at our conference this past year was a big QR code that showed up on the screen. But since we're a B2B company, it's a little bit by invitation only. That's a great way for us to generate leads and interest, but we still have to qualify them to make sure they have a solid use case where they're actually going to find use and success with what we're building. We don't want to just invite anyone and then because they are excited about the software, but then it's not really the right fit for what their business is doing right now. So it's a little bit more hands-on and qualitative over quantitative. I imagine for B2C companies, you can probably just release software to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Like if, I don't know, something like Google is releasing something, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but you have so many users every day in a B2C space that can test stuff and you can track that quantitatively. Whereas for us, we're qualifying them, working with them hands-on and getting that feedback from them directly.
Yeah, there's definitely a mixture. There's all sorts because beta testing itself is like, there's so many people that will say like, oh, we're going to do a beta test, but there's like so many different types of beta tests. There are quantitative beta tests. Like when you think of public beta tests, you're thinking hundreds, thousands of people. You're looking at analytics. You're looking at behaviors. It's less qualitative because it's harder to be qualitative with thousands of people. Like you don't get that opportunity to like work one-on-one with thousands of people, many people that they need to communicate with. So you kind of change up your objectives a little bit. The product is probably further along, a little more developed. We've already probably gotten that earlier feedback. And now we want to look at those numbers. What are adoption rates? What are our error rates with bigger numbers? But earlier development, we want to get that real qualitative, hands-on, build those relationships with people, make sure that we're kind of tweaking and tuning the product alongside with these people. We call it like something like co-development or co-creation with your users.
Right.
We will see that. I know Google and all these companies have these different types of beta tests that will, the term beta just gets kind of thrown around so often as being like one specific thing when it's got so many.
Right.
Cool. So you started picking up, we'll talk a little bit more in the B2B vein. When you talk about building these relationships, working on one-on-one, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that is in that same situation? Maybe they've been doing it the wrong way of thinking quantitative. Like what would you recommend to somebody that is starting a B2B test? Maybe it's not a completely functional 100% product ready to go and they need to focus on qualitative. How would you kind of explain to them or give them some advice?
Yeah, I would say don't underestimate the voice of the customer. I speak as being a product manager for several years. It can be tempting to just move forward with your design to get something out faster. And sometimes it can be hard to wrangle the customers in and get a wide variety of perspectives from them, but it's really worth it in the long run. So really take the time to talk to customers that are coming from different industries, different size companies, if that applies to you, and just making sure that you're documenting what they have to say. I know a lot of data-driven decision-making and data-driven initiatives tend to overemphasize quantitative data. I feel like quantitative data is seen as superior in some regards. Maybe that's just my own experience, but I think qualitative data is just as important, if not more important sometimes, where you can really dig into a customer's story and put together a case study or a testimonial or something like that. A data point alone or some aggregate number or percentage can't tell. I think both have their place and together can tell a complete story, but don't underestimate the value of having a customer conversation and getting that qualitative data. It's just as much data as numbers are.
Yeah, I've seen that before. Like I've seen a lot of beta like results slides, and some in I don't want to say like immature, but like fresh, newer companies, or not newer companies, newer programs, and they tend to do that. They tend to like, oh, here's our numbers, right? We had this many bugs come through. We had this many testers. We ran it for this many weeks, and they were all like, oh, we need to just jam numbers in here because that's all that people care about, right? But one specific word that you said that is like one of my favorites of all time when it comes to data is the story, telling the story.
Right.
The numbers don't always tell a story, right? They're behavior. They're just, big things. But when you like combine an aspect of qualitative with some quantitative, you get this really like nice story to say. So like if I start off a presentation, I'm saying, let me tell you the story of, this one person, right, that was on our beta test. And then I followed up with numbers, like things like they had a great experience. Here's their story, what they enjoyed about the product, what they liked, how they would recommend it. And then I show something like, here's the NPS score. It's great. Or I show a star rating or satisfaction score and it's great. I can do that same thing in reverse of whether or not it's they have a bad experience, right? So here's someone who had a tough time onboarding. They ran into this issue right away. And here's the ratings, the satisfaction ratings. And I get to tell that explanation of here's the stuff that is detracting this score specifically. So it allows for using all the data sets that you have. Even if you have 20 people on a beta, you can get some quantitative aspect of it. It's hard to say like I'm just going to stick to anecdotal one person numbers, right? So do you have that same mixture? I'm assuming you do still use some numbers on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, there's room for both quantitative and qualitative. The point I was making is I think what you said as well is people tend to overestimate the value of numbers and underestimate the value of qualitative data. And I think there's an important role for both of them when you're telling that story.
Yeah, definitely. So when we talk about presenting this data, you have a variety of teams. We talked about product management, right? You have product managers or stakeholders. Do you have other teams that are involved in testing that you consider stakeholders that you're presenting this data to?
Yeah, so beta programs at Appian are super cross-functional. We have obviously me and the product managers involved, but as I mentioned a bit earlier on, we have our customer success team that helps customers be successful with our software, and they're usually involved as well. We're involving UX designers. We have the actual software engineers who are building the product. We have our support team who's helping customers get set up with the beta implementation so that they can use it and be successful with it. We have people from marketing helping us with recruitment, especially when it comes to larger events or webinars or things we want to do. We have legal involved because, like I mentioned, we're a B2B company, so it's not something we can just push out to anyone. There are terms that are in place. I'm trying to think. Probably everyone at Appian or every functional area touches our product in some way or another, and beta programs are still relatively new, so figuring out what everyone's role is in the long term is still something I'm working on, because since I've only done a few projects so far, each one has it's hard to determine what's going to be a trend and what everyone's involvement's going to be across projects versus where it's just a specific scenario for one particular project. But I think the more cross-functional it is and the earlier we can get people involved, the better. Oh, one team that's really involved that I forgot to mention. Sorry, sales. Sales is involved too. They really help us with recruiting and account management. So if we're working with an account and maybe it's somebody who was super engaged at first, but they've fallen off a bit, working with the account teams to determine a strategy to re-engage them and keep them working on our software, working on using it and implementing it and making sure they're going to be successful in the long run and want to buy it once it's generally available. That's a super important role as well. Sorry to anyone who's listening who I missed, but I think that covers most of it.
So you said one thing is that some people will fall off over time. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and not fall off permanently. Yeah, I think it's just certain lulls. Like I mentioned, we're recording this in September, coming off of summer. Sometimes key people are out, one key person's out for a week or two, and then another key person's out a week or two after that, and all of a sudden it's been a month or something else might come up and their team's getting pulled in another direction. So you can imagine yes, this is beneficial for them. They're getting early access to our software. They're helping us shape our roadmap to get a product that they really want to use. And that's something that's valuable to them. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to prioritize their own internal projects over something they're doing with us. So if their own stakeholders are telling them they need to build something else or go do something else, it's hard for them to justify but I need to spend X number of meetings or hours a week or a month on the Appian project. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think, like I mentioned before, just making sure that they're engaged over the long term and excited about it, even if there's certain portions of it where things are a bit slower, not to give up on them because it usually ends up working out in the long run.
All right, now I have to have some tips because I want to clip that immediately. Give me some tips. How are we going to keep them engaged over a period of time? How are we going to I want to say prod, but keep them motivated or get them enthusiastic again?
Yeah, I think telling them what's coming next oftentimes, sometimes if there's a little bit of time in between a release that we give them and when the next new thing is available, they can stagnate a little bit. But if we know that they really want X and such thing and that's coming, I feel bad saying we dangle that in front of them, but just keeping them aware of that and just really understanding their use case and what they're trying to do. I think that's a super important part of having a customer relationship is not just understanding your product, but understanding the problem the product is trying to solve for the customer. Because the better you understand their use case or business case scenario, whatever you want to call it, the better you can speak to that and make sure that you're highlighting things in your product that can really highlight what they're trying to focus on. And that has generally been pretty successful for us. And like I said, it's a group effort. Sometimes we're pulling in account managers or people who already have a years-long relationship with this customer, whereas we just met them a month ago or something. So having everyone come in from different contexts, contributing different information about the customer and what they're trying to do. And then we're contributing information about the product and how it can solve their problem. Kind of going back to what we were saying about qualitative and quantitative data, it really comes together to create a nice story and a nice engagement strategy.
All right, so you have a lot of teams involved. Do you have different stakeholders that come in at different times of the cycle? Are some involved much earlier and some involved just much later in the process? Is there what's your rule of thumb for involving other teams?
Yeah, I think product managers are obviously very involved throughout the whole duration of the project, as are account managers and people who engage with the customer directly. I think up front, some of our support teams that help them get set up with the software are a bit more involved, whereas once we're transitioning to getting ready for launch, maybe their role isn't as heavy anymore. Marketing kind of waxes and wanes. Marketing's role is a bit bigger when we're announcing the program, and then they kind of taper off as we're doing the beta testing, but then it'll ramp up again as we're transitioning to a launch. So I think there are certain roles that are involved more at the beginning or the beginning and end, and others that are a little bit more steady throughout the whole period. But again, that's one of those things where I have only been in this role for 5 months, so I'm speaking from a relatively limited experience in beta specifically, but that's been my experience so far.
I definitely feel that. I being in marketing, and we have our own beta program that runs on our product. I know I get told that we're doing a beta test on a new feature set or new things that are coming out. I'm like, okay, cool. I got to go line up the things that I'm going to want to say market to. And they go run the test, and like I'll just like pop in every once in a while, say like, oh, how are we closer to this date? Can I get this kind of information? Like, oh no, we gotta wait, or yeah, here we have this. We can do like a quick interview. So we need to do any press releases or write any blogs or get some testimonials. Like I have access to that group of early people to be able to leverage for our go to market for that specific feature set.
Right.
So that sounds good to me. I know I've seen a handful of companies operate with that same diversity. I've seen some far less where they're just involving maybe product and potentially engineering. Like I've seen worlds where it's just very engineering focused, and everyone else is going to get like thrown results at the end. But I love hearing your approach of getting everybody involved and kind of taking the lead on that and saying, here's how you can use data, this is what I'm going to need from you, or this is how you can be helpful. That sounds like a really, really great strategy, even for like just getting started. So that doing great.
Yeah, and I think naturally engineering just gets woven into it because at least at Appian, our product managers and engineers are so tightly integrated. Like our product owners are embedded on a team of software engineers building the product. So fortunately, it's not a super siloed thing. I remember that was an adjustment for me when I came to Appian because I had always worked for organizations where our engineers were contracted or they were offshore or it was a different department. And I was like, oh, product and engineering is together. This is weird. But now that I've been doing it this way for years, I can't really imagine being separate from the engineers.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So your next steps, you're getting ready to close down a test. So you've been running it. You have some results. Are you doing anything special, say towards the end of the test, or that's like here's a closure report, or here's something that I have that's like an analysis of everything? Like how are you delivering those end results?
Yeah, so we like to incorporate analysis throughout the project. It's not just a linear thing where it's like, okay, now we are doing the beta test and now we are reporting on the beta test. It's like customers are joining the beta at different times. So right now it's like certain customers are very far along and we've already gleaned a lot of insights from them. So we're reporting on those and sharing them out so that other product managers who are working on the product but aren't necessarily engaged with that particular customer are still staying abreast to what we're learning from them and how that can influence their roadmaps and backlogs. But also we're reporting to stakeholder groups outside of the project that maybe aren't as closely involved, but like at the executive level who are very interested in how things are progressing. So just knowing what level to speak to at different things. Obviously, if you're talking to other product managers, you get really into the weeds about specific features that aren't working and why or why not. But at the executive level, we're reporting out a little bit less frequently, maybe monthly instead of weekly, and just giving them a higher picture view, bird's eye view of what's going on. And then we can delve into any particular area that they're interested in because we're doing that analysis in real time. So it's good, I think, to analyze as you go and not wait until you're done, particularly if you're in a scenario like us where you have customers that are joining the beta program early on and then others that are joining months later. You have customers at various stages at any given point, which I think I'm realizing this is becoming a theme helps round out the story in another way.
Stories, they're a thing. So you gotta do storytelling with data. Another thing I'll just keep saying that I love that you're saying is that tailoring of results. Now, I have my own interpretation of that. Why are you tailoring results to your audience, stakeholder audience?
Yeah, it's just different people are interested in different things. Like Appian is a large company. We have a few thousand employees and we have a ton of initiatives going on. We have a lot of product managers. It's a huge enterprise platform. So I think for any executive stakeholder to be in the weeds on every single feature at any given time is not realistic. So just knowing like what they're interested in, kind of going back to what I was saying with customer conversations as well, like understand what they really want to know and what they're trying to solve and just tailoring it to that, but also being prepared to answer any follow-up questions they have. So for example, our people in the C-level probably don't care about specific components of a feature, what has a bug and what doesn't. They're looking for a bigger picture, like, okay, in general, are they successful or are they not? And why or why not? And what are we doing to fix it? As a whole, not like with specific capabilities within the feature.
Right. And you say you do a weekly with your say key most involved stakeholders?
Yeah, we do a weekly sync just to make sure everyone's staying up to date. So that's a group of product managers and people from our launch team as well. And then we have other meetings where product managers are sharing findings from what they're learning from customers, because each product manager is working with different customers. So seeing what's common across customer engagements versus what might be an idiosyncratic thing for one customer. So just having those meetings where we can identify trends early on and course correct if needed, I think is very helpful. I know everyone kind of groans at having more meetings, but it is really valuable rather than getting into silos and just having a couple product managers working with one customer and a couple other product managers working with another customer and not collaborating across the groups to see what themes are common and what's unique to a specific engagement.
Definitely agree. We tend to operate in weekly phases like that where we have results kind of come out. They do happen in real time, like you've been to Bearman. You see results every single day come through, but then reporting those back up is great on a weekly basis. So that's a great best practice, I'd say. Now, you run those meetings. What do you have for tips for people that are running those weekly meetings with their key stakeholders?
Come with an agenda. If you don't have an agenda, then things can spiral, or I don't know, maybe spiral is a little harsh, but things can go off the rails and maybe a stakeholder wants to focus on one particular thing that you didn't have on the agenda, but you have all these other things. So I think making sure people know what the agenda is and they have an opportunity to weigh in on that. That's something I always do when I open the meeting. I have the backlog or the agenda that's in a document that we all have access to so people can look at it ahead of time, and I go over it and then I say, is there anything else anyone needs to talk about today that we need to get to? Just so I know how to manage the conversation and manage the time so that we're not spending too much time on any one thing, or that something that wasn't even on my radar ends up taking over the entire conversation. And I think especially with executives or VPs or even directors, like they have a lot going on. So just make sure they know what the meeting's about and be efficient.
Love it. Great stuff. Now, do you have communication that also goes out after the fact? Like, is there anything that you're sending? So you have that meeting, you have your agenda that you're kind of preparing for, you go through it. Is there something that you're delivering? Is there a deliverable at the end of those meetings?
Yeah, some of the meetings, yes, some no. So we have a channel that has, not like it's like a Google group where people who are involved in the project closely can share things. So a lot of times if there's like a big outcome that a bunch of people are going to need to know, I'll share it in there. If it's something that's not super urgent, I'll loop it into some monthly report. Again, it's just kind of using discretion of who needs to know what and just erring on the side of sharing more instead of less. I'd rather over communicate than under communicate. But we also communicate out to customers as well. We have a space for customers to collaborate with each other if that's of interest to them. It's not something that's required, but just making sure they have that space to learn from other beta testers. And then that gives us insight as well to what we might want to report out on to other customers, like, hey, we saw this trend, like, that problem we were having, that actually seems to be a larger problem, and that's something we're fixing, and here's how. So yeah, I think just communicating at different levels and different modalities as well. Like, I'm giving a presentation in a couple of weeks to speak to all product managers across our organization about some of the programs we're working on, because product managers who haven't worked with me yet and this new beta function might not know exactly what we're doing and how to leverage me and the beta function. So yeah, different levels of different information. Some are written presentations, more like a narrative document. Some are a quick chat. Some it's like a presentation where I'm getting up in front of a group and speaking. So lots of stuff going on.
I would connect you with Alex Larson. He was one of our podcasts early on. He's been a long time friend of Centercode. But he did that same thing. He would call them like his little roadshows. I think he had a specific name for it, but I'm going with roadshow. He had roadshows where he would go out to the different teams. He had a big B2B company. He worked with one subdivision, and he just kind of took over. He took his not little presentation, took a presentation, went to those different teams and said, here's what I can offer. Here's what our team can offer. Here's how you interact with us. Here's results that we've collected. And I feel like that's so powerful, right? To be able to offer those services. So you're acting as a service organization within your company. So have you started that journey yet? Or are you just getting ready for it?
I don't know if I'm going on that journey, but I'll have to see if a roadshow is worth it. It's one of those things where I guess we are a little bit early on, so want to make a little bit more progress on a few more programs before I volunteer a roadshow. But maybe we are getting to that point. I'm almost 5 months in now. Actually, 5 months. 5 months on the 17th. So almost there. I think we're getting at a point maybe when we hit the 6-month mark, or maybe in January, kicking off with the new year, I can do a little roadshow internally and tell everyone what we've been working on. But I think communicating to those different audiences and giving that roadshow, it's like the same but different depending on who you're speaking to. Same story, but maybe different things you focus on. And that's a skill I really honed in on as a product manager as well, because when you're talking to your software engineers about what you need to build, you're talking at a very detailed technical level. But if you're talking to sales or marketing or something, it's a different level. So I don't know that I would take the same presentation and go on a roadshow across the whole company, but I think you can more or less tell the same story and just under or overemphasize certain things depending on your audience.
Yeah, and he's definitely hit a scale. He's got a whole group of people behind him, so he manages the whole team. I'd done something similar with Western Digital when I was there. We crafted a list of artifacts, things that we've done, impacts that we've had for different tests. We came up with like a list of offerings that we had, but we had a full team of like 20 plus people. So like it's a little bit easier when there's like an army behind you that can deliver on that stuff. Like I could imagine you opening the floodgates of here's all the things I can do would be a tad overwhelming if you're already doing a lot with the programs and you're 5 months in. So
for sure, but maybe that's more could be more fodder to get me a team, right? It's like, look at all the awesome things we could do.
Those results are going to be so key in that, right? Like showing here's those, and you can even do that same thing. I have testimonials from stakeholders that I work with. Here's what they're saying about the program. So I've worked on that with a couple of beta programs at other companies before. Of like, here's how you kind of leverage your stakeholders to get more stakeholders, so you can kind of expand your teams.
Yeah,
we'll chat about that some other time. But yeah. That's a fun conversation. Growing a program is super fun. It's great seeing you kind of at those early stages, because it's like all your eyes are so big. There's so much that you can kind of tackle, but having to, I don't want to say carry the weight of having to run the programs while trying to build your program is real tough. So I admire you for going through that journey.
Thank you. Yeah, my strategy here is really to take the first year in the role to learn it because, as I mentioned before, I've only done a few programs and each program has been a little bit different in every way. So just really leaning into that and seeing what I can learn so I have solid ideas about how to grow the program. And I think that'll time pretty nicely with when we're hoping to scale the beta program and maybe have a few more beta program managers so I don't have to be in the weeds on every single project. But yeah, I think the first year in this role or any role in general is just learning as much as you can, and then we'll go from there.
And it sounds like you have a great champion. I've heard about your boss a couple times, but
yeah?
Well, just from you, not
Just
I don't
from
have any
me.
other people though.
Hi, Jim.
No, he was reviewing some stuff. I know that he put you in your role, right? Like he put you in that position. So he sees value in it, right? That's I consider that a champion, personally. So
yeah, absolutely. And even the manager I had before was the one who flagged the opportunity for me. She knew what I was really interested in and what I was good at and the areas that I wasn't as interested in and maybe not as strong in. And she had been my manager for years, so we had a really strong relationship. So she knew about this opportunity that we were going to try to start a beta function within our launch team. And she said, "This sounds really great for you. I don't want to lose you from my team, but it sounds like something you would really enjoy and thrive in." So really big kudos to her for flagging the opportunity for me, as well as my current manager who took me under his wing, even though I've never managed a beta program or built a program from the ground up. I had the knowledge of Appian because I had been a product manager at the company for a few years, and I had industry expertise from working at other companies. So I think maybe he saw some potential that I could learn on the job. And so far, I think it's going pretty well.
Based on this conversation, I'd say you're doing a really good job. You're saying the right things, and I hear a lot of great best practices, a lot of great tips and advice for people that are just getting starting off. So that's, kudos to you for that.
Yeah, thank you. I think when you reached out, it was the little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, oh, I've only been doing this for a few months. Do they really want to interview me? But I think
the best time.
Yeah, no, that's what I realized
right now.
The best time you can, or there's a lot of times that are the best time. Like any time can be a great time. And I know I'm involved in the mentoring program at Appian, and that's something we say. It's not just mentors with their proteges. It's the proteges can teach a lot to the mentors as well. No matter what level you're at, there's something you can teach someone else or help them with. And maybe there's other people out there who are in product management looking to make the jump or at least curious about it, or they're new to beta testing. So yeah, I was like, no, I can do this. I have a unique perspective. So I appreciate the opportunity.
And I agree with that, the mentor and mentee mentality. I've been in beta testing for way too long at this point, and I've seen way too many programs. But there's always this energy of, oh man, yeah, I forgot about that, or I haven't done that in a while, or you just get this energy from someone who's a little bit fresher into it. But you also have a very interesting background and perspective that's kind of cool. I love psychology, and I think a lot of the things that go on in psychology is really applicable to research, and research is very applicable to beta testing. It's how you're asking questions, how you're interacting, and how you're presenting the data even. So I think you do have a unique perspective. There's people that come from support to beta, there's people that come from QA to beta, there's people that come from research and product, and there's all these different avenues, and we can all learn from each other's different backgrounds and say, I want to say upbringings, but how we get started inside these programs, and what advice or techniques that we use that other people could use. A lot of people don't think to cross-functionality, or not cross-functionality, like someone in B2B will get anything from B2C, or someone that's in mobile apps will get something from a server company that's doing B2B hardware. There's a lot of stuff that we can learn just from each other. That's why we're so putting emphasis on building the community that is beta programming managers and product managers have to do beta testing to offer these advice. So
absolutely.
All right, so I have a couple more questions just for the end. Why beta testing as your career right now? Current spot.
Yeah, so I think there are a few things. Being able to build a program from the ground up was very appealing to me. And after being a product manager for so many years, I wanted to engage even more with customers. As I mentioned before, we do speak to customers as product managers, obviously, but I wanted to be a bit more front and center and kind of running the show when it comes to that stuff. And I think it's just so fulfilling to see a customer using something you built and having that vision come to life. And I have the unique benefit of having been a product manager at Appian before this role. So I'm still working very closely with a lot of my peers who I worked with before. And there are certain things I was building as a product manager that may be eligible for beta testing soon. So just kind of being able to see it all the way through, see things come to life after years of ideas and product design. I think it's so awesome to have your customers actually using it and helping shape the feature so that it can be even better once everyone is able to use it once it goes to market.
So you've started your program. You're about 5-6 months in. You said 5 months in.
Yeah.
Has there been a mindset change in the organization, probably particularly within your stakeholders, your executive team, since you've stepped in and started these beta programs?
I think, yes, in general. It's a little bit too early to tell, though. So right now, it's just understanding where my role is and how I can help facilitate beta testing rather than I don't want to step on toes of product managers. I want to help them. So I think figuring out who owns what, it's a little bit of a growing pain at first, but even within the first few months, I think for the projects I've been on, we've figured it out relatively quickly. I think what's going to be interesting in the coming years is really seeing how impactful the beta programs have been. It's a little bit of a lagging indicator, if you will, knowing how successful things are, like being able to see market trends like, okay, these beta or these features or products went through a beta program and these ones didn't. And we're seeing this much more adoption and engagement from customers here versus there. But sometimes getting those adoption trends, especially for an enterprise platform like Appian is, it can take a year plus, multiple years. So I think focusing on those quick wins, like, yes, we have everyone on this project knowing what we're doing and we're moving along and we're getting that feedback from customers. That's a pretty immediate indicator of whether things are being successful or not. But I think there are things that lag a little bit where it's like a year or two from now, I'll have a much stronger story to tell about how impactful our beta programs are. And hopefully that'll help sell it to other people and realize it's something we should continue investing in.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally agree with that. That's the fuel for the roadshows, right?
Yes.
Get a couple under your belt and get those going. So I can agree with that statement. One thing that's kind of interesting, I'll see if I can get your take on this, is there's aspects that beta reporting, you report on the test. Mm-hmm. Then there's other aspects like you talked about, like whether or not you're having an impact, which is typically like program related things. So I've always liked to think of a beta testing program as having like these three elements: the impact that we have on the business and on the product, and then there's our stakeholders. And I've always included like customers and internal employees as stakeholders in that vein. So
right.
those are, each one of those can have different sets of metrics. Like you can grow your community, you can have more tests that you run, you can have more stakeholders that you're involving. Are you looking forward at any of those metrics as you are, and you're just getting started and you don't have many to include in there, but those metrics that you're going to be looking at?
Yeah, I think something we do at the beginning of a project is identifying what those KPIs or success criteria are for each stakeholder group, because as you mentioned, maybe what product management is interested in is not the same thing that sales is interested in. They want to generate leads. We want feedback. Sometimes those goals are at odds with one another, but sometimes they're not. So just learning what everyone's goals are, and at the end of the day, we all want the product to be successful, but what success looks like to different stakeholder groups might be different. So just identifying that early on and making sure as we're making decisions across the program, especially if it's a long-term program, something that's running for several quarters and things are shifting, I think it's always helpful to anchor back to what those success criteria are. Like, what did we identify at the beginning of the project? Is this decision we're making aligned with the success that we hope to see or that we thought we were going to see? And if not, let's talk about that. So I don't think every single beta program will have the exact same KPIs or success criteria, but I think the process of talking to key stakeholder groups and identifying what those criteria are for any given program is something that I want to keep consistent across all of our beta engagements.
Definitely had questions come up with people that were presenting results, and they show me a score and they're like, is this good or bad? I'm like, what were you trying to do? Like,
yeah, you told me.
Like they show me a score and I'm like, this, it could be like compared to what? Like, what did you get last time on your last test, or what were you trying to do? Like, what is this? So like having those conversations early on about what are you interested in learning? How can we measure that? And how can we look at that at the end of the test and say, did we achieve that? Did we get what you needed as a stakeholder? Or are we taking into consideration those ones that are butting heads of, I want more leads, but I want really, really qualitative feedback from a small group of people? It's like, nope, I'm not going to be able to get a lot of leads and small data, right? Like very niche, deep relationships with people.
Right.
So, yeah. Thank you for dealing with my random questions that I throw. So I appreciate that. And I think you did a absolutely wonderful job, and I appreciate it so much. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd love to come down to your event in Raleigh when it's happening on the East Coast. That's not too far from me. It's like a 45-minute flight or a 5-hour drive. So maybe I can meet you in person, or our paths will cross at some point again.
Thank you for listening to the Delta Huddle Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave us a like or a 5-star rating. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. We'll see you in the next episode, and happy testing.